A chictopus? Chictopus. Oh, that's a chictopus. Definitely a chictopus.
Chowder, why do you keep saying that? What the heck is a chictopus anyway? Chowder, I'm tired of you making things up all the time. This isn't a game, boy, so I need...
One of my favorite movies of all time is Disney's The Sword and the Stone. While it's definitely not the best of Disney, and, well, let's be frank, has a really fucking bad ending, literally every single other aspect of it hits so hard for me that it might just be the single most influential animated movie for a dumbass freak monkey like myself. It's lighthearted and relaxing while still having an engaging premise. It's got dorky fantasy shit, wretched old crones, kooky old men, plus, psycho that I am, I love the Xerox style of 60s and 70s Disney. What can I say? I watched this movie alongside things like The Aristocats a lot as a kid. I'm sure that movie aged well, right? Oh god, oh fuck! Basically, I'm down for any kind of story about the master and apprentice relationship, especially if it's a chill slice of life kind of deal. I honestly think Sword in the Stone might be one of the most ahead of its time movies ever, being far, far too early in the life of animation to be what it was truly meant to be. A great TV show instead of a movie. But that would have been impossible considering that for the first 4 decades of television animation in the US, it was a complete and total wash. The movie is already pretty episodic in nature, which just makes it easier to rewatch in short bursts. It would make an amazing 10-episode long, chill out before bed kind of show. But what if you took the laid-back Iyashikei feeling of Sword in the Stone and crashed it Mach speed into the side of an over-the-top gag manga with a similar premise like, say, I don't know, Dr. Slump or Dragon Ball? What if you took the moon and you took the sun and everything that seems like fun, stirred it all up, and when you were done, you shared a big piece with everyone? To that I say, dear viewers, come on in and feel free to do some looking, because it's time I finally talked about Chowder. The 2007 Cartoon Network series Chowder, not to be confused with the colonial-era soup dish Chowder, was one of the final classic Cartoon Network shows in my mind and many others. It was the brainchild of C.H. Greenblatt, or Carl as the cool kids call him, a man known for working on the absolute most funny episodes of the absolute most funny cartoons like SpongeBob and Billy and Mandy. I may have said this before, but the Krusty Krab training video is my favorite episode of SpongeBob, and is just one of the funniest things ever made in any cartoon.
Ah! Poop!
Looks like Mr. SquarePants understands poop.
Chowder began very much like The Sword and the Stone, as a story about a wizard and an apprentice, but was quickly snackified to be about a catering company instead. One of the key components that makes great cartoon creators so great is the understanding of character, relationships, and purpose necessary to get people invested in your insanely stupid show about a cat, bear, rabbit thing and a blue guy who was mercifully not voiced in a racist Apu voice when he very well could have been. What I mean by all of this, regardless of the flavor, the dynamic and type of story was decided on first, and is what gives Chowder its unique sense of self. The food thing is just frosting on the delicious... Look, okay, this is a food themed show, so I'm allowed to make as many food metaphors or similes that I want, goddammit. I pretty cleanly went from being obsessed with SpongeBob in its first 3 seasons to being obsessed with Billy and Mandy throughout its entire run. Without knowing it, I had been subconsciously following Greenblatt across multiple channels. Chowder instantly became a new obsession of mine, something that is really curious, as I've alluded to before in previous videos, that I was kind of turning my nose up at modern cartoons at the time. My gym partner's a monkey, Squirrel Boy, Robot Boy, a lot of something boys on Cartoon Network at that time for some reason. I think that's proof of how excellent and hilarious even the pilot episode of Chowder was, that it brought me back from the brink of being too old. Just long enough for Adventure Time to make me as down bad as I am today. We'll talk about Adventure Time in a later video. Now, since I waxed about characters and all that, why don't we take a look? There is, of course, the main pairing of Chowder and Mung Doll, as well as Mung's assistant Schnitzel and his Jewish wife Truffles, and his rival Endive, whom has her own apprentice in the form of Panini. Chowder himself is the beating, greasy heart of this show. It's actually probably only reasonable to talk about the cast as they relate to Chowder, because that's just the way that the show is structured. As the show begins, he is a vacuous but well-meaning kid that ends up screwing up whatever dish of the week. By the time we get to season 2 and 3 though, he becomes extraordinarily dumb and frequently puts his friends in mortal danger.
I love you, and not just any old love. The kind of love that is needy and dysfunctional.
You may think I'm complaining about fucking Flanderization or some other TV tropes nonsense, but no, it's just funny. While Chowder, the series, is definitely not really concerned with being grounded or having really any kind of emotional storytelling, Chowder, the character, is likable due to being so reminiscent of lovable dumbasses like Son Goku.
Chowder! Get ready to cook!
Woohoo!
You can stop now.
I wish I could, but I'm stuck.
As well as having just enough humanizing moments across the 3 seasons to latch onto. As far as Chowder as a vehicle for fat jokes go, I as a fat guy myself should probably be more offended, but I think it was more relatable to me as a chubby tween than insulting, and that's kind of stuck with me this whole time. That being said, none of his peers really mock him for being fat, besides maybe Gorgonzola, and Panini is definitely into it, so it gets a pass. That's right, skinny people. You can laugh comfortably at his chubby little baby titties and cartoonishly big nipples, guilt-free. Mung Doll serves as the mentor to Chowder, a man that, while is a genius chef, is a gormless sap that consistently has far too much faith in Chowder. It's clear that Mung truly does value Chowder as some sort of surrogate father, or grandfather, or great-great-great-grandfather role in his life. It's refreshing to see such a character in an otherwise very cynical show like this that can still be funny and insane, but can be there to actually keep you invested in the ongoing plot, or plot with heavy quotation marks, of Chowder becoming a chef. No, his much more cynical relationships are with his Jewish wife Truffles and, of course, Schnitzel.
Yeah, I'm so calm. Now the audience can finally understand me. Yo, my name's Schnitzel! All right!
Mung and Truffles are basically just a cartoon version of Miracle Max and his wife from The Princess Bride. And, well, yeah, it's a lot of the, take my wife please boomer humor. You try staying married to one person for fucking 300 years and not being driven insane. Come back to this video 300 years from now and leave a comment. My spectral consciousness will probably be uploaded to the cloud at that point, so I will be able to read it. Truffles herself is a funny character, though not one with much interiority beyond being a vile harpy that torments all of the men in her life, though there are some notable episodes that go into a bit more depth with her. Episodes like Mung on the Rocks, where Mung forgets their wedding anniversary and ends up having to do a heartfelt gesture to repair their strained love life. One of the, again, very rare episodes that has a genuinely sweet and touching ending. There's also the Elemelons, where Truffles is caged in with a group of sentient fruit that she repeatedly insulted and has to learn to connect through them. And The Trouble with Truffles, where she becomes self-conscious of said harpy behavior and decides to get a less threatening voice.
Now stop clowning.
Which ends up backfiring when nobody listens to her and they all devolve into cavemen, which is close to the most perfect plot twist you could come up with. All in all, though, Truffles makes it out relatively fine as far as prominent female characters go in this series, as well as at her time in general.
A piece of lint. How nice.
Schnitzel, though, is absolutely the Squidward of this show, and I feel like that just completely sums him up right there. Just also with the added gimmick of him only ever saying rada rada, so you only kinda know what he's saying at any given point. Side note, This is a really genius performance on the part of John DiMaggio, as yeah, he only says one nonsense word over and over again, but the insane amount of emotional clarity that comes through in his performance is unbelievable. Not even a similar character like Coco in Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends has this level of readability in her lines. On top of that, Schnitzel gets some of the absolute best and funniest episodes of the whole show, including C.H. Greenblatt's personal favorite episode of Schnitzel Makes a Deposit, an episode all about the tedious process of Schnitzel making a deposit.
Would you care for a free lollipop?
Would I?
Would you?
Would I?
Would you?
Would I?
Would you?
Would I what?
Care for a free lollipop?
Would I?
Would you?
Would I?
It's a tour de force and ringing humor of the most boring nonsense. And when I first saw this episode as a kid, while Chowder was premiering, it's when I realized it was something truly special. Because while SpongeBob and Billy and Mandy made me laugh, this one made my brain laugh.
Last night I dreamed I was a bottle of ketchup and you were mustard. Which is weird because usually you're mayonnaise in my dreams. Why do you suppose that is?
It was a real, this show is part of my DNA now moment. Maybe one of the most notable legacies of Chowder is in the character of Panini, and it would probably shock no one that she happens to be my favorite character. I mean, look, Schnitzel or Truffles didn't get a goddamn Lil Nas X song about them, did they?
Oh, hey, num-nums. I can hear the bells. Can you? Begone, demon!
She is the main rival and, in her mind only, love interest to Chowder, being a chef's apprentice as well, but under the other best character in the show, Lady Endive. Panini appears first as an adorable little moppet of a creature, but over time develops into an obsessive and narcissistic gremlin that torments Chowder with her affection. Now, I know the girl who has a crush on an unwilling boy is a pretty tired cartoon trope. I mean, I made a whole Tiny Toons video earlier this year, but I feel Panini hits different, you know? The joke doesn't just begin and end with, ew, girls are icky, and it's both funny and a little sad, but also in a charming way instead of an annoying way. Beyond all that, though, I have a huge love for really aggressively self-obsessed characters, and it's those peeks into her soul that we get throughout the series that really elevate her. In general, rewatching the series this time, I couldn't help but feel the kid-centric episodes were the best, or at least my favorites. Mainly because I'm fresh off watching all of Camp Lazlo, but while there are very sparse episodes, it's just kind of nice to see Chowder being a kid amongst kids, whether it be Gorgonzola or the most underutilized and best side character, Ceviche.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how desperate would you say you are right now?
11!
Even a lot of the episodes where it's just him and Panini are excellent. I would say that Bruised Blue Nana is one of the absolute best episodes of the show because it's not only absurd and hilarious in all of the right ways, it does a great job showing that Chowder actually does like Panini and considers her his friend, and he hates to see her upset at the end. I think all of this was the seed of the idea that would then sprout into Harvey Beaks, a show focused almost exclusively on the kid-centric stories, and it's just bursting at the seams with not only the trademark absurd Greenblatt level humor, but another level of emotional honesty that we only saw glimpses of in Chowder, like the aforementioned episode. Now look, I would not call either Panini or especially not Endive a win for female representation. They're both pretty dodgy in many ways, but my god do I love Endive either way. Introduced as the smarmy and elitist rival to Mung, the only woman that the ladies' man Mung cannot bring himself to mac on, with the solid defining trait that she is obsessed with appearances and class rather than food tasting purely good. Though as far as characters that slowly get retooled to be way funnier, I think Endive gets hit the hardest with it in a good way. By the end, we see her for what she really is, a lonely single lady with serious abandonment issues and a compulsive need for validation and affection, which sounds depressing, but manifests in many hilarious antics like Schnitzel's other best episode, Schnitzel Quits, where he ends up being sick of the negligent abuse from both Mung and Chowder and joins up with Endive, who immediately tries to make things sexual. Speaking of sexual, maybe the animators were a little horny for Endive because there's a lot of scenes of her scantily clad, and I know it's a joke on about how she's not sexy because she's fat or whatever, but they definitely went far enough in the other direction that it just comes off as purely horny. Not judging, just, pointing it out. And okay, look, I make a lot of jokes about cartoon moms, especially of the fat-assed variety, so I know you probably think I am also attracted to Endive, but look, it's complicated, alright? Speaking of complicated and grim mirror reflections of myself, we gotta talk about perhaps the most important side character, Gazpacho. Yes, I would never forget about him until after finishing recording this script. Anyway, Gazpacho informs a bigger portion of why I love this show so much as a kid than it may seem at first glance. As soon as I moved to the not-so-big city from my heinously small trailer in the country, I was introduced to the wonderful world of a non-stop cable television in my bedroom. So that meant that I could finally watch all the Cartoon Network my foolish brain could handle. Now look at me, an extremely cool guy making videos about shows from 15 years ago with absolutely no personality issues whatsoever. Anyway, let's go back to why I relate to Gazpacho. The Freaks come out at night, as does Adult Swim, and you bet your ass that as an irresponsible 9-year-old, I obsessively watched it before bed. Home movies, Futurama, and especially Aqua Teen Hunger Force leaked like a toxic spill into my dumb preteen brain. While we all love to imitate Meatwad or Carl, Dana Snyder was undoubtedly the voice of Aqua Teen as Master Shake. During that time, he was like some sort of comedy god to my preteen brain. Hell, even in Code Monkeys he captured my heart with his voice and ad-libbed sense of humor. Does anyone on this godforsaken earth remember Code Monkeys or fucking Minora Team? No? Keep it that way. For Dana Snyder to grace a kids show with his voice, a kids show that, may I remind you, came out when I was the exact age to think that cartoons were quote-unquote gay, well, thankfully it gave me the smack on the noggin that I needed. That a kids show like this can still be equal in terms of comedy to something avant-garde and cutting-edge like Aqua Teen was. That the best shows don't talk down to the audience, regardless of who it's aimed at. This goes for everything from Bluey to Primal. Great art can be appreciated at any age. Hell, now we have a show like The Ghost of Molly McGee, which has him as a co-protagonist, and that's also a kid's show, and it's also hilarious.
The lemmings don't believe in themselves, Scratch. They don't believe they can be winners.
Well, they believe correctly, Moll, because follow me on this, they're losers.
I guess a lot of it genuinely comes down to the right ingredients, or at least being able to use those ingredients the most effectively. But what about Gazpacho himself? He really does happen to be one of the most interesting characters in the show, getting a lot of focus throughout the 3 seasons. I have to wonder if Dana Snyder has, mother issues, because I think nearly every single role he does has some sort of Norman Bates-esque tortured mother complex. I find it really bizarre and hilarious every time, so make of that what you will. Speaking of that, maybe one of the greatest contributions to the show that Gazpacho brings is being a good counter-argument to the punching down that the female characters are subjected to that I had mentioned previous. This poor bastard probably gets it the worst out of everybody in the series, even over Endive.
Comedy Gold! Relationship comedy! Comedy Gold!
That being said, he is Chowder's closest friend, in a weird twist, while Panini is closer to his age, and he has a personal kind of friendship bond with Mung. The man-child nature of Gazpacho allows him to slot in quite naturally or unnaturally into the best friend/sidekick role to Chowder. Gazpacho is always there to offer bad advice and be a shoulder to cry on, just as often as he is to rope Chowder and company into the dumbest crises they have ever faced. Despite being a fairly two-dimensional joke character, the utility that they get out of him is unmatched. I'll just say that as someone who makes cartoon videos in his free time on YouTube, I do often relate to these kind of characters that find themselves trapped between childhood and adulthood in a, well, at least I'm not that bad kind of way. Alright, that does it for the characters and comedy, but what about the nuts and bolts stuff, the animation? Because even though animation is ironically never really my main focus when evaluating shows, in my opinion, Chowder still stands head and shoulders above many of its contemporaries, even in that department. The show has just got such an outstanding and immediately recognizable style, so much so that even the latter two Greenblatt shows cannot compare, or at least aren't as unique in that regard. The whole look of the show has this amazing Dr. Seuss meets Busy Town vibe to it, with all the occupants of Marzipan City being odd creatures or people all wearing outrageous fashion. If that wasn't enough, the background and color design has this very evocative feeling to it. It really does feel like the produce section of the grocery store visually, if that makes any sense. Then on top of that, there is maybe the most iconic design element in the textures of the clothing being a separate background layer so that the texture stays in place as the characters move. It may seem like a minor or completely meaningless thing to people that don't know, but ask any single person who has watched this show about it and they will know exactly what you're talking about. Think about how rare that is for such a small element of the show to stick that hard in people's minds, and how interesting that is. And on top of all of that, the show even dabbles in mixed media. In very similar way to The Fungies, which I talked about last year, usually once an episode, a stop motion or even puppet effect is implemented during a key scene or a close-up, courtesy of the practical effects studio Screen Novelties. This adds yet another wrinkle to the overall visual character of the show, as there is something Pavlovian and primally satisfying about seeing a joke being punctuated by a practical effect. It's this unnecessary extra step and effort that ends up being well worth the effort because it gets a response from me and is super memorable. They even have ending tags with goddamn Muppet versions of the characters. How much more perfect can you get? Man, maybe I should just rip the Band-Aid off and do a Muppet video soon.
We're back for more TGIF,
which will now stand for Thank Goodness I'm Freaky.
What all of this leads to is the kind of show that sticks with you, regardless of its quality. But of course, the show has quality in spades, as I have no doubt laboriously demonstrated so far. Literally the guy who made Fred Burger and the Krusty Krab training video made this. Somehow Chowder trumps even the mighty Season 3 of SpongeBob in my heart when it comes to raw comedy gold. I was just the right age to love SpongeBob when Season 3 aired, but I was just the right age to not like SpongeBob or any cartoons when Chowder aired, and lo and behold, I loved it and I adore it now with a passion that only time can breed. The training wheels were off and I had fallen for the bike rider of my soul, Carl Harvey Greenblatt. However, even longtime lovers have their issues, and I promise I only bring these up to eventually highlight that Greenblatt would go on to make an even better show after. The dark specter that has been looming over all of us, and that I've mentioned in pretty much every single review on this channel that I could, is, well, cartoons of this time were not well known for their sincerity. I understand why. After the treacle garbage of the 80s, the more artist-driven era of the 90s, ran by the Gen Xers, drilled into pop culture a new attitude towards pop culture and entertainment. At the time, being insincere was far more sincere than the Smurfs. I grew up brain blasted with this stuff from a young age. Everything from SpongeBob to Billy and Mandy to Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Grim, you know this guy?
But I eventually grew weary of it by the time that I had entered high school. So there's this one show you may have heard of called Gurren Lagann, and well, for your and my sanity, let's sum it up quickly and say that the story of the show is all about abandoning bravado and embracing sincerity. Only then could one become truly outstanding and become truly free. This kind of story turned my brain inside out and sort of bumped up against shows like Chowder, though I didn't know it at the time. I watched the show to its shockingly cathartic end, and a weariness of sorts set in. I wasn't upset to see it go. See, season 1 is a wacky and wonderful show, but there's a certain groundedness to it, a certain sense of place. One of the absolute best episodes of the series is the very early Cinemini Monster, a dry and hilariously tedious episode about Chowder being forced to play board games with a depressing sad sack of a creature.
Rattle, 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 rattle.
I don't care if you don't want to be the burned toast.
Everyone else tries to help, but then they're all also trapped with him forever. There is a hilarious purgatorial vibe to the episode, and going by what Greenblatt has said in prior interviews, this feels like the mathematically and chemically perfect episode of the show that he wanted to make. I mean, it's about squeezing hilarity out of mundanity, and it's about board games.
1. Yes! Move back 1 space. Yes!
Like Camp Lazlo and like My Gym Partner's a Monkey Before It, however, as the show progresses, the show very rapidly loses its mind and becomes an absurd parody of itself. By season 3, the very fabric of the show is so tenuous and torn that somehow it's less grounded than the episodes in the previous season that literally involve the characters running out of budget and other such fourth wall humor.
But worst of all, look! You made the viewers cry!
No, what have I done?
None of this is to say it stops being funny, but it stops really being Chowder, if you know what I mean. A show that had an extremely unique and specific identity at the start, based in a palpably real, if kinda stupid world. One based on The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but with food, or Carl Greenblatt's love of the Muppets, or Dr. Seuss, or even Dragon Ball, that has become simply SpongeBob or Billy and Mandy. But again, with all that said, for better or for worse, the show ended exactly when it stopped being fun. I have mentioned in previous videos that the penultimate episode, The Toots, is a masterpiece, and I mean it. That episode feels like the spiritual finale in a weird tonal sense, and it spins a yarn with emotional weight about the dumbest thing imaginable. The finale itself is still a great ending, leaving the show off to the next generation. It feels so much like a metaphor for Greenblatt moving on that he literally voices Chowder as an adult who has grown up and is passing stuff on to the next generation. Whether or not he had it in him all along, his next show would absolutely show us how much a more reserved and grown-up Greenblatt could still rule super hard. Though that's a video for another time. This brings us to today and the recent release of the absolutely stellar Jellystone. A lot of very high-quality modern cartoons have come out in recent years, and while Jellystone is a bit on the cheaper side, it's still a phenomenal series that continues the path tread by Greenblatt's previous works. A cursory glance at much of the positive buzz around the show will reveal to you dozens of dump trucks worth of folks saying how this show is like a cartoon from the good old days, and no, not because it's about Hanna-Barbera shows from the 50s and 60s, but because it reminds them of Chowder. I've seen this proselytizing time and time again, lifting up more comedic shows over the more story-focused ones, despite the fact that the difference between the two blurs more and more every single year. Still, folks persistently claim Jellystone's greatness lies solely on it going back to a pure time, when cartoons didn't have any of that story nonsense. I agree that Jellystone is great. I loved every moment of it, and I think it's right up there with Chowder in terms of comedy. However, I don't really think modern cartoons are becoming too humorless or serious or whatever it is these weirdo purists think is happening. We can investigate the greater cartoon community's lack of any amount of literary analysis at some other point, but I'll just say this for now. Little did they know that Chowder wasn't even like Chowder when it was at its peak. Nor did they know that the vastly superior masterpiece of Harvey Beaks was quietly airing a few channels deeper. Maybe if they watched that show, they would have already known that you can have your cake and eat it too. Love Jellystone because it's like Jellystone, not because it's like Chowder, not because it's what cartoons should be, but what they can be, and often are. We can keep what made the oldies great and still evolve and progress. Maybe it's time to hand things off to the next generation and move on, or hey, learn to appreciate and love modern cartoons in their own way? All that said, I'd absolutely recommend going back and watching Chowder. It's one of the funniest shows ever made, and it's bursting at the seams with creative energy and personality and artistic talent. Even just visually, it's still just a delight to watch, but when you add in so many fun characters and the breadth of plots the show ends up tackling, it really becomes a whole buffet table of goodness. Okay, that's my last food metaphor, I promise. Sometimes it is just nice to go back and visit a simpler time. Like I've said before, it lets you reflect on what you, as in you, the viewer, have lost, but also what you gained along the way. How you're different now, but deep down are the same, because you still laughed at the sometimes incredibly dumb jokes. I think everyone can and will get something out of Chowder even today, that maybe even the more story-driven shows, sparks of what made Chowder so brilliant are present, whether directly or not. It may have lost its identity along the way, but what remains is still some of the most genuine laughs you could ask from any show. Thank you, Greenblatt, for firmly rewriting my brain with this little series, and for reminding me why I loved cartoons to begin with at a tough part of my life. It may not be the fanciest steak at the restaurant, but when you get it and you eat it surrounded by friends and family, and all those who remind you of how far you've come, you'd swear it's the best goddamn steak you've ever had.